What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tsla, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down three catalysts that are causing the market to sell off right now as we're getting some bad news. We have some updates that came out from President Trump as he's making some very, very big announcements about Jerome Powell, as he's given us some important quotes and comments. I'm also going to break down what's happening with all these different charts. Just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I'm saying as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. Moomoo is an amazing global brokerage account that has exclusive offers. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 25 in total. If you deposit $5,000, you're guaranteed 60 in total. Just keep the money in the account for at least 60 days. You'll also qualify for an 8.1% APY in uninvested cash, and the offer ends on June 3rd. On top of this, the reason why I promote this is because if you keep at least $100 in the account, you'll also qualify for free level 2 data. This is very useful for trading and things like that because you will be able to see what's happening with the market with very nice insights on what's going on with the options chain to understand what's going on with consumer sentiment and liquidity zones. And this could really assist you with your trading journey. So check out my link down below. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So as far as the market's going, looking at SPY, as you guys could tell, we had this blue trend line acting as our resistance. I mentioned to you all that as we hit this resistance, we reject for the market every single time. And to be bullish, you wanted to see SPY get back above the blue trend line. Now, what I initially thought would happen is that we would see some kind of consolidation first before we get some kind of sell off of this. But what happened was we ended up selling off early because we got a lot of bad news that came out from President Trump and China. So I'm going to break down what the news is first, and I'll talk about why the whole market is selling off. But this news was very profound, very comprehensive. It's affecting tech, finance, retail, trade, and the list goes on. All these different stocks are in the red. Looking at consumer durables, we're seeing Amazon, Google, Nvda, everything is selling off as we got some bad news. So what's happening so far? The first thing I want to mention is that some Chinese funds are seeking to be excluded from investments in US companies made by private equity firms because they want to once again kind of sway away from the markets given what's happening with governmental pressures. So we're seeing this affecting trade, and with the tariffs that are being imposed and the tensions so far, they're swaying away from investments into US equity firms. So that's some very, very big news right now, is taking away funding from different places, and this in turn is once again causing some downside in my opinion. On top of this, there's been some news that's contributing to why that happened, and that's the fact that China has warned countries against concluding agreements with the US that could harm Beijing's interests. And let's break down exactly why that is. So China's Ministry of Commerce said that while Beijing respects countries' resolution of their trade disputes with the US, they oppose any party reaching a deal at the expense of China's interests. If this happens, they said that they will never accept it. China's saying they'll never accept it, and they will take reciprocal countermeasures. That's the first thing that happened this morning with this news coming out and with these threats continuing, which is causing the trade war tensions to rise. This is hurting the stock market to some extent. This is part of why the market saw a bit of a sell-off. This is affecting investments into the US. It's affecting current views right now, and it's not the best of news. Now, President Trump has mentioned many important things. I want to give you guys an update on what he said. He mentioned that when asked about how and if he's going to be lifting these tariffs, he mentioned that he will do it if there is fairness. President Trump said that he wants there to be fairness, he wants there to be equality, he wants to rebuild wealth in America. That's what he basically said. So he is saying that the US is willing to negotiate with all these different countries, from the European Union ones to China, but we need fairness. We need there to be as much fairness as possible because he believes the US is being abused. Those were his exact words, excuse me. So this is very important. He also mentioned that a deal with China may take 3 to 4 weeks. So we're not ready for that yet. If he announces a deal with China, of course, that's going to be bullish news for the market, but we're not ready yet. It may take several weeks, according to President Trump. But he mentioned that 70 countries have been negotiating with the US, and we're seeing countries with the looks of like South Korea, Japan, European countries like Italy, and then we have a bunch of others like Mexico and China all trying to negotiate, come up with some deals. Right now, he wants things to be in the US's favor. That's what President Trump wants, at least. And we'll see how things end up going for now, but there are still tensions continuing to rise. Now, there's more news coming out. involving President Trump and Jerome Powell, as now President Trump is criticizing Jerome Powell. He called him a major loser. He also called him Mr. Too Late. I'll actually show you guys the real tweets. And then President Trump warned us that there could be a slowing of the US economy unless Jerome Powell ends up cutting rates more with the Fed. So that's what President Trump has said. This is the exact quote that we have from Donald Trump himself. President Trump said that preemptive cuts in interest rates are being called for by many, with energy costs way down, food prices substantially lower, and most other things trending down. There's virtually no inflation. This is what President Trump is saying. With these costs trending so nicely downward, which is what he predicted they would do, there could be almost no inflation, but there could be a slowing of the US economy unless Mr. Too Late, so he's calling Jerome Powell Mr. Too Late, a major loser, lowers interest rates now. So he's saying now we need to see interest rates go down. Europe already did this 7 times, according to President Trump, and Jerome Powell has always been way too late, unless it came to like the election period. So he's getting very political with that. But I just want to say that this is big news because now President Trump is making it very clear he's not happy with Jerome Powell. He also said a couple of days ago that he is willing to fire him. He's willing to fire him. He threatened to fire Jerome Powell, get him out of there and replace him with someone better. That's what Donald Trump is saying about Jerome Powell so far. Now, obviously, Jerome Powell mentioned that if being asked to leave, Jerome Powell's not just going to step down like that. He's going to wait for his term to end, which I think is going to be next year. But the thing is, like I've said before, this is not the best of news because, first off, President Trump is threatening to fire him. President Trump is warning of an economic slowdown if he doesn't cut rates soon. And he's putting all the blame on Jerome Powell, saying that he's too slow, he's too late, he's not doing a good job. And that's what President Trump's point has been. So, what does this mean for the markets? Well, the first thing is this creates more fear for the markets when you're saying things that there is a slowing of the economy coming unless we get some kind of cuts now. Jerome Powell has mentioned that he's in no rush to cut rates because of the risk of higher inflation. He did mention that there's a higher chance we get higher inflation with the tariffs being imposed. So it's just a back and forth game right here. Obviously, President Trump does not agree with Powell and thinks he should just cut anyways, whereas Jerome Powell is always saying he wants to just wait and see what happens with the data. And this is causing a lot of tension, at least for the markets. As a result, you guys can see the markets selling off. We're seeing all these fears right now about Jerome Powell potentially leaving, and the list goes on about the Fed. So for now, that's why the market is responding like this. This news involving China cutting investments from the US, the news about China threatening retaliatory moves if the US continues to make deals that hurt them. At least that's their perspective. That's what they said. And then also the tensions between the US and China as a whole, and then the news about Jerome Powell potentially being fired and all this criticism he's getting from President Trump. It's causing the market to sell off quite a bit. So that's why we got all this bad news this morning. Now, keep in mind that tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. We have a couple of Fed speakers in the morning, such as Jefferson and Harker. Then at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the Richmond Fed Manufacturing Index, shipments, and revenues reports coming out. So look for some volatility 30 minutes after the stock market opens tomorrow. And then on top of this, keep in mind that for tomorrow in the morning, we have Verizon announcing their earnings, which is very important for communications. And then we have Tesla announcing their earnings. That's going to be a big one. Get ready for a lot of volatility once that comes out. On Wednesday, we have Boeing and AT&T, not to mention IBM. On Thursday, we have American Airlines, Intel, and Alphabet all announcing earnings. But for the time being, I just want to say that we're going to be looking at these two right here, Verizon and Tesla, Tesla being a big one to watch for. Now, the fear and greed index is currently at extreme fear, as making up the majority of sentiments. Momentum is also at extreme fear right here, as we're seeing this fall. The put to call option ratio is also at extreme fear. That's making up the majority of sentiments. And then the VIX, the volatility is actually kind of going up just a little bit. The VIX is starting to rise, which is a bad sign for equities, at least for the time being. So with that being said, what does all this news and data mean for tomorrow? Let's talk about what I think is going to pan out from this point on. Unfortunately, if you look at the trend on SPY, we keep on making lower highs. We keep on rejecting, so the chart is technically bearish. And we've dropped quite a bit, at least so far. So we're going to be looking to see if we could form a base like right here. Right here is our next support at this 510 area. This is where we saw some buyers try to defend today, this 509 to 510 zone. If that fails, if that fails on SPY, we could be dipping all the way down to the very low 500s. So keep that in mind. This is going to be a key support. But my prediction kind of goes like this. So let's actually go over the scenarios. Then I'll break down what's going to likely happen. So what's the bullish case? Just hypothetically, let's just say that out of nowhere, President Trump suddenly announces a deal with China. Let's just say that happens out of nowhere, right? I'm not saying it will happen. Let's just say hypothetically, SPY could try to get back above 525. If we do break that, you want to see us get back above this blue trend line. If we break this, then we're bullish. We're looking for basically the 540s if we do get some kind of bullish move, if we get a super bullish catalyst, which we don't have right now. If we're bearish, you want to see SPY fail at this 509 to 510 area. If that fails and SPY does not hold this, I think we could dump all the way down towards 500, if not 494. So there's going to be a risk of us dipping to 500 or lower if we end up failing around 509. Now, my prediction is a little bit different. I think that if you look at the way that this is moving from at least a Fibonacci standpoint, whether you want to draw it from right up here or not doesn't really matter. But you guys could see that there is a chance that we might see a small rebound move tomorrow to retest our 0.382 fib level or around that zone before we get another potential rejection. So we are looking bearish in terms of the trend with all this fear involving China, but I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of gap up tomorrow. We see a little temporary push for this 518 to 520 zone first, and then we might just consolidate like this before we continue to fall. We might be looking for a move like this first heading into tomorrow as the most likely move. So look for some buyers to defend just temporarily. We might see some consolidation approaching Tesla's earnings, but then there's going to be a risk of more downside as time goes on if we continue to see bad news involving Jerome Powell and China. So keep that in mind. For other pieces of news, I want to mention that for the QQQ, it's the same thing essentially. If you're bullish, you want to see us get back above 444, then eventually this blue trend line around 450. If we break past each of these, we're looking for essentially the 466 area as our resistance. If we're bearish, you want to see us just continue to reject here. If we can't hold above 440, we're going to likely continue to fall. So we're looking at basically this 430 zone, very close to that area. If we don't if we don't hold 430, we could easily start dumping back down towards this imbalance over here around that 419 area. That's the more bearish case. My prediction is that, judging by the fact that we rejected on the QQQ every single time we're hitting this blue trend line, and the fact that there's some weakness on this trend, we are looking bearish overall. We did hold 430, which is a good sign that this might try to push for like 437 or so, which is where this imbalance is. But then as time goes on, this might continue to fall again before it continues to dip all the way down here where this imbalance is around 418. So I do think that there's going to be a risk of more downside for a move like this as the most likely possibility. Of course, it depends on the news coming out for tomorrow, but there is a risk of some downside. We might get a temporary pop first before we get that downside move. On the IWM Russell 2000 or below our 20 EMA, there's a good chance we might attempt to retest the resistance at 184, but then we could reject and continue to fall if that ends up being the case for 180 or below. So to be bullish, you want to get back above 187 to start pushing higher. If we don't hold above that, we might just see a small retest of this zone before it continues to fall like this as we're showing some weakness. On ES, we lost 5,300, which is a bad sign. I said if we lost this, I'm looking for 5,149 as my potential target, which is where my line was, very close to where we went to so far. Now, this zone right here, this like 5250 area is now going to become our resistance, previous support becoming resistance. So I think what's going to likely happen is the same thing. We might attempt a rebound move. Now, to be bullish, you want to get back above 53.35, just to be clear. If we reclaim that, we're looking for a big push up. And if we lose 51.50, we're looking for a dump back down towards essentially 5,000. My prediction is that 52.25 to 52.50, that range might be retested, but ES might not last up there. We might consolidate for some time before it continues to fall lower. We might just continue to fall like this as we're continuing to reject. Once again, we're making lower highs and we're just continuing to look relatively weak. We could even redraw this trend line I had drawn out over here. We could even redraw a trend line like this as the resistance, but from the way I see things, we're still looking weak nonetheless. Even if you draw a trend line like this could still be our resistance, which is where we're rejecting from. So a move like that looks very probable, at least on ES for the time being. For NQ, it's the same thing. So what happened to NQ is that we were consolidating in this wedge, and I did call this out yesterday how it was looking bearish, but we're just going back and forth in this wedge like this, right? Then we broke support right here. We back tested the area, then we just continued to fall. So that's what happened, at least so far. Now, if we're bullish, you want to see us get back above 18,500. If we reclaim 18,500, we could attempt a nice rebound move. If we're bearish, you want to see us lose 17,500. If that fails, we could be dumping back down to about 17,200 to continue to fall. So we'll just have to see how it goes. If anything, what I presume is going to likely happen is that we might be making lower highs. We rejected like this. We might attempt to get back above like 18,100 to 18,200 in this range. But then if we keep projecting, we're going to likely continue to fall like this back down towards the lower 17,000s. So there's a good chance it's going to be doing something like this. So just keep that in mind. For Bitcoin, we have a nice looking inverse head and shoulders like structure. We'll just have to see how it goes from here. If we lose 84,000, we're looking for a bigger dump back down towards 82,500. If we end up breaking past 88,000, we're looking for basically 90,000 as our resistance. Just to be very, very frank, we're still looking relatively weak here. But I just want to say that we're at a tough resistance, so I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of like dip first because of this weakness before it might continue to go higher if we could hold support. So I do see a back test of like 86,000 coming. We'll see if we bounce off that or not to continue to go higher. We'll be watching that on Bitcoin. Overall, the trend is looking decent, but there's a little bit of weakness for the shorter term. I do think we dip to this range where these EMAs are before we see some kind of bounce. For Tesla, I'm not too worried about this. So it is bearish right now. We did call this out yesterday. There's so much bad news for Tesla when it comes to their price targets being downgraded. There's fears about them potentially seeing some products being delayed, their new affordable EV. There's just rumors about that, if anything. I don't think they've confirmed that, but that's all over the news nonetheless. There's been a lot of talk about how there's a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against them. The list goes on, guys. It's just bad news after bad news. There's also fear about their earnings not looking too good. So it's been a lot of bad news for Tesla as it's dumping, but keep in mind that we have earnings tomorrow, which is going to be on Tuesday, after market close. So that could be a game changer depending on how that goes. Looking at this setup, we're making lower highs here, and we do have a very, very nice confluence around this like 215 area. So it still looks weak with all this bad news. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar to SPY tomorrow. So looking at these levels, for example, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a retest of like the 230 area or below, maybe around this range here, but then we could fall down to like this 222 to 215 area. And we'll see if earnings causes this to like bounce really nicely, or if we get a big rug pull to like below 215 all the way down to like 200. I'll be watching that very closely. It could go either way. We'll just have to see how our earnings goes. So I wish the best for Tesla, but we'll see just to be safe if it gets some kind of break or a dump. Do we break out or dump? It all depends on that. But as of right now, we might be dipping towards that 215 area. And then earnings will be affecting whether or not we get some kind of bounce. On Nvda, we have this yellow trend line acting as support, and we're technically on a large downtrend. So we're at support on Nvda. I think that going into tomorrow, we might grab liquidity here and see some kind of rebound attempt for like the 100 area. But then as time goes on, it might not last, and this could continue to fall like that. So we'll see how Tesla's earnings affects this. And nonetheless, it still looks kind of weak right here. We're at support right here around this like 92 to 95 area, so it might dip towards that. And we'll see if this is forming like a head and shoulders here, so it might just continue to downtrend, especially as time goes on. So look for this support right here. We'll see if we rebound a bit before it continues to fall, so keep that in mind. For Apple, we're also making lower highs again. We're going to be watching to see if we could reclaim 198 to 200 to bounce. If not, we may continue to fall. But like I said before, we might try a retest of these EMAs tomorrow towards 198. We'll have to see how well we hold up. If it doesn't hold with all the fears about China, we may continue to fall. So be very, very careful. China is a very, very big part of Apple. Apple depends so much on China. And with all this negative news and all the tensions, it's not the best for them. There was also a big downgrade that we saw in their price target. I did see some analysts downgrade their targets on Apple. That's part of why we saw the share price sell off. So keep that in mind. We might be looking for a move like this. Now, Netflix came down to 980 exactly as I predicted yesterday. And we're going to be watching to see if we could hold above these EMAs. See the blue, not the blue, the green line right over here. if we could hold around this 968 area. We might be retesting 968 to 950, and we'll see if we bounce off this to continue to go higher. The setup is actually bullish off this double bottom, but if we have to bounce between 950 and 968, so I do think we retest that zone and we'll see if we get a bounce. I'm looking for that on Netflix. It's still showing resilience. On MSTR, we saw this sell off a bit with all the fears. I do think we're going to retest our EMAs. And as a bearish setup, unless we get back above 330 to really bounce, we're still looking kind of weak here. So I wouldn't be surprised if this actually sells off a bit towards these EMAs, and we'll see if we bounce. But look for some downside towards those lower levels, down to about 310 or below. Celsius is looking weak. We might be retesting 34.8 or below. And if that fails us, we're looking for 33. So we'll see how it goes. Supermicros on a downtrend. We need to get back above 32 to bounce. If not, we could be looking for essentially 27.5. For Palantir, we're technically forming a double top here. We could be dipping towards this 89 area. If that fails us, we're looking for 87. We'll see if we bounce or not. But I do see a risk of us dipping towards 88 to 87. We'll see what the reaction happens to be like. But there is a risk of some downside looking at the setup. This also looks like a head and shoulder, so I'm favoring this gap fill for 88, if not 87. We'll see how it goes. Look for some downside. Rivian's looking weaker. It might be dipping towards 10.5 before it tries to bounce. We're super tight right now when it comes to like SoFi. It's not really doing much. We're just consolidating, so I do anticipate it's going to continue to do this. If anything, I think the wedge has been expanded, and we're just going to continue to consolidate. It's trading sideways until we break in either direction, but that's all I'm seeing for now. AMD is making lower highs, so it might continue to fall. We might be looking for a retest of 86.5 before we continue to downtrend for essentially 81. For ARM, we're making lower highs here off the bearish divergence, so I could be looking for us to continue to fall towards 92.5, if not around 90. But I do see some more downside potentially coming. Coinbase is showing some strength. We have a nice inverse head and shoulders setup. It's very tight right now, so I'm not really worried about that. I'm more worried about can we get some kind of break or not. So I would argue that it's possible we're just getting tight like this, and also like this, and then we'll just have to see how it goes if we get some kind of break in either direction. I do anticipate we get tighter and tighter, and we'll see if we break to the upside or downside, so be very careful. For Amazon, we're making lower highs here. We have to see if we can break past 174. If not, we might be dipping back down lower. Now, I like the fact that we held around 165, which is what my target was. So this might rebound a little bit towards like 170 to 172.5, but then we could reject again off of that because of that resistance right over there. So look for a small rebound before it continues to fall. Same thing with Meta. Meta's at near the support here, so it might go a little lower towards like 475. Might grab liquidity there tomorrow, and then we'll see if we get a temporary bounce closer to like 490 or so before it continues to fall even lower. So we're going to be watching a move like this on Meta. For Microsoft, we're looking weak. We could be dipping all the way down to 350, depending on if we could get back above 365 or not. Might push for like the low 360s before it starts dumping for like 350, so keep that in mind. And then for Google, we're looking weak here. We might be retesting 152, and we'll see if we continue to fall back down to 145. For DJT, we have resistance around this 22.57 area. If that breaks, we're going to be going even higher, so watch that very closely. The VIX is looking bullish, but it depends. Can we continue to hold above 33.1? We need confirmation, of course. If we hold this, it could be looking for this gap fill over here around the 37 area, which would be bullish for it and bearish for the stock market. But if this loses support around 32, we could be jumping to fill this gap around 30. As of right now, this looks a bit more bullish, which is bearish for the markets for now. So we'll see how it goes. The 10-year is kind of consolidating. Depending on what happens with Jerome Powell and the Fed, as of right now, it's holding up. But we'll see if President Trump and his administration try to bring yields down again. We'll wait for that. The dollar is dipping as we're seeing a lot of fear about Jerome Powell losing his job and all these fears involving China. So keep that in mind. That's what we're seeing so far. Ultimately, the share prices for SPY, the QQQ, and many tickers are bearish as we're making lower highs. We might see a temporary bounce tomorrow as we're at support on SPY, the 510 area, which is what we called out. We might see a temporary rebound before it continues to fall, but as of right now, we're still looking bearish. Now, the news could change in a flash depending on what President Trump and many others say. So make sure you're always open-minded to anything and you watch your levels just to be safe. But for now, the market might see a small rebound tomorrow morning, but then there's going to be likely more downside coming if this fear involving China continues, and if we continue to see President Trump criticize Jerome Powell and all these other pieces of news continue to perpetuate. Thank you for listening, guys. I appreciate you guys so much for listening. Please have a good rest of your day. Enjoy your nights and the evenings, and I'll be back tomorrow before market open for another update. Until then, have a good one, and peace out.